Go. Hello, horror fans. This is Pete from the Lasser Cast, and I am here on this Saturday morning to talk to you about the movie Something in the Dirt, which is the fifth film put together by Benson and Moorhead. Danny, my co-host, Dr. Zayas God, you've seen more than just Spring by Benson and Moorhead, right?
Yeah, I think I've seen all of their films. They did, was it called Resolution?
That's the first one.
Yeah. So I actually saw um Spring first.
Right.
Then I saw The Endless,
Okay.
which I actually went to the city to see in the movie theater on the strength of the poster art alone and the fact that it was by the guys who did Spring. I
Right.
was like, and I don't know if you saw The Endless, but
I have not.
the monolith, like the thing that's on the poster for The Endless, shows up in this movie several
Oh.
times.
Oh, okay. That's cool. I didn't know that. All
Yeah,
right.
and like all of their movies are kind of like linked. The Endless ends up kind of being. I then saw Resolution, which came out first,
Yeah.
and they basically play the same characters in The Endless that they are in Resolution. And then this almost feels like a spiritual third part of that trilogy. And they did Synchronic also, right?
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
which I really enjoyed. I think I did like a 30-second short review for our channel when that movie came out. That was Jamie Dornan and Anthony Mackie, and that was really good. Like they are probably, like we always talk about Mike Flanagan and James Wan being like the preeminent horror minds, and then of course you have like Jordan Peele and Ari Aster and Robert Eggers, and they're doing all this amazing work in horror today. I feel like Benson and Moorhead are the sci-fi versions of that, where
Mm-hmm.
they kind of live in this bonkers little sci-fi bubble that they've created, and their movies aren't for everyone, but if you're down to watch something just trippy as hell, really interesting, uh, and science fictiony, they're the two guys to go to. They also did episodes of Moon Knight, right? Correct me if I'm wrong.
You're correct. Yes.
Which I felt like when I heard that, I was like, that was the perfect Marvel show for them to get involved with.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's,
I've been big fans of them since I saw Spring for the first time.
right, right. And I saw Spring, I think it was at South by Southwest. It was either South by Southwest or Fantastic Fest, one of the film festivals we have here. And I saw it with Sherry. We'd never seen any of their other stuff or heard of them. And we just loved that movie. That movie is so good. I haven't seen any of their other films. I haven't even seen their portion of VHS Viral. So the only other thing I've seen of them is the Moon Knight episodes that they did, and I couldn't even tell you off the top of my head like which Moon Knight episode they did. I wasn't really a big fan of that show. It usually is pretty low in my rankings of Marvel shows, but I am sure that whatever they had to do for that show, they probably were like kind of held back by Marvel people and stuff. They couldn't be as like creative and out there. This movie, you said it's not for everyone. It's funny. I've actually watched it twice at this point, and one of the times I watched it at my mom's apartment with my mom, and I don't think it was for her. Uh, you know, it, I watched it a second time so I could be like, what was the the reasoning behind making this particular story? I know the practical reasons why they made this movie. They made this movie because it was uh, Benson came up with it during COVID, during the lockdowns in 2020, and the movie is filmed primarily in his apartment, and they use like archival footage when they have these little flashes to things that they're referencing. So obviously, it's a very like do-it-yourself movie. The very last, if you look at the end credits, like they have all this fun footage in the end credits.
Dedicated to making movies with your friends. I actually sat through the end credits, and I actually took a couple notes based on that. Like when I saw that dedication in the credits, dedicated to making movies with your friends, uh, part of it made me think, it made me reevaluate the movie a little bit, and
Okay.
it kind of reminded me on not in scope, not in like size of production obviously, but in like almost theme to Nope. where the idea of in Nope, they realize there's this thing on their farm, and they, instead of like, oh my God, there's something on our farm that's, out of this world, we need to get the fuck away from it. They decide we're going to, record it, go to the local, Circuit City, load up on technology, and this is how we're going to make our fortune. And these two guys in this hotel room witness this bizarre, this rock that they have, this like piece of quartz that they have. It just starts floating and emanating light. And it's like this almost a miracle type of thing at first. They think it might be a ghost. And instead of being like, well, time to move, they're like, let's make a documentary and let's record ourselves dealing with this phenomenon. And it kind of ends up engulfing them in some weird way. So I kind of got Nope vibes. Hello, Kat. From that. And I really, that was the last thing I wrote on my paper. And I only really thought about that at the end when I saw that, like, making movies with your friends line for some reason.
Yeah.
Did you also notice that C. Robert Cargill was in the credits?
Oh, yeah.
And also in another, like, credited role was Isa Lopez, who she directed Tigers Are Not Afraid, which was easily my favorite horror movie of 2017, the year it came out.
Okay.
That was a Mexican horror film about a group of kids dealing with drug cartels and like ghosts and weird shit that happens. Fantastic little movie. I'm not sure if it's still on Shudder, but it was on Shudder. And just mentioning them, cheers to everyone at Shudder for all the great work that they do, considering there's AMC's cutting people and kind of, becoming the It's a Wonderful Life villain at this time of year.
Yeah. I mean, that's a whole nother can of worms we can go into, and it definitely like timestamps our video. Like there was just the announcement that they were laying off staff from Shudder, and that's a real bummer for Danny and I because I mean Shudder, I don't know if we would even have our channel if Shudder didn't exist. Like Shudder is such a big part of making our videos and what we do and what we talk about. So I mean, I've seen a lot of people say how Shudder has like shaped the horror genre at this point, like that we're living in.
Cultivated like the concept of the horror community, the horror family, whether it's because of like Joe Bob and the Joe Bob specials, or just, we've referred to it as the closest thing to being in like video stores. That feeling that you got walking down the horror aisle at a video store in 1989 is kind of what it's like scrolling through Shudder's back catalog now. And it sucks that, people who like I've interacted with on social media, a couple people I've actually met in person, like are apparently, losing their jobs at Shudder. So, good luck to them. They're all really talented people, so they'll land on their feet. It's not a question, but it just sucks. And, for our channel's sake and for the horror community at large, I hope Shudder stays around for a long time.
Oh, yeah. And, we were talking about potentially maybe interviewing someone from Shudder too. If you guys are watching this video, if you want to reach out to us, you can always find me on Twitter, AnchorPete929, or Danny. His Twitter handle's right there. We're thinking about maybe doing a video about this, like a whole video unto itself. So you can feel free to, contact us on Twitter if you want. But, this movie itself, this is the kind of movie that you'd find in the video stores and you'd take a chance on it. And probably because of the cool cover art, like the poster for this movie is very cool. I have it behind us right now.
That's why I went to see The Endless. I mean, if you just Google image the poster to The Endless, it was one of the coolest images that I remember seeing. And I was like, oh, I really liked Spring. I have no idea what this movie's about, but I'm going to go take a shot on this movie because the poster looks really cool. And I drove into the city. We have this, the IFC Center, really cool little independent theater in the Village. and I used to go there like once a month just to try to see like, you know, any kind of new release that was in the genre field. I actually saw Tigers Are Not Afraid by Isa Lopez there also.
There you go.
So,
All right.
yeah, that became like a little getaway point before, you know, I started going to Alamo and before I got my Regal Unlimited.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, you know, for this movie, I'm glad that you compared it to Nope, right? Because that's like that cinematic experience. That's the movie that people keep referring to at this point. And this movie, just kind of guys like us and people on Twitter are going to refer to this movie. It's not this sort of big mainstream kind of thing like Nope is, but that's a very smart comparison to like the plot of Nope and the plot of this, you know? And I think that Nope, as big a scale as it is, even though it only involves a few people and it's mainly outdoors. So I think it's still, I mean, definitely was still made within that COVID window where like things weren't completely open yet. I'm sure there's a lot of restrictions. We've kind of lived now as if COVID is completely done. But I know that when they were making Nope, they probably were still in the middle of it. So COVID itself, and we've said this a couple of times on this channel, has really shaped filmmaking for the past few years. And we're probably going to still see the effects for years to come. And this movie, it's kind of interesting because Benson is the one that wrote the movie and the two directed it.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like he, even though it's just on their two shoulders for the majority of the movie, I feel like he is the one that you sort of are more drawn to, you care about more. His character's name is Levi, and then Moorhead is John.
We should preference it's Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead. For those of you who have never seen any of their movies, they just go by, you know, it's a Benson and Moorhead production, but it's not like Rick and Morty. They actually have human names.
Yes.
But yeah, so I was going to ask you, which of the two characters, because they're both very strange guys, which character did you gravitate more to? Because for me, it changed midway through the movie.
John always gave off this vibe that there was something kind of sinister about him. And so, like, you know, at first he seemed like a nice guy, and I thought there might be some issues with him. But pretty early on, like 20% through with the movie, I was like, oh, there's something weird about this guy. And so I felt that way throughout the whole film. Levi, I had some sympathy for him, especially watching it the second time around. And I feel like Benson's acting was so good, especially his facial expressions throughout the movie. There's quite a few scenes where he doesn't really say much back to John, but like you just kind of read on his face how he's feeling. And so I think I was more empathetic towards Levi. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And it's funny because there's a scene in the movie where he's linked to he's linked to the National Sex Offender Registry.
Right.
And you're like, oh, well, I can't identify with this character anymore.
Right.
But, you know, if you believe the story he tells, which I do kind of find semi-believable.
Right.
I think exactly what you said about Aaron Moorhead's character, John, is right. Like, it just felt that there was always something shady about him.
Right.
And then like he just kind of drops out of nowhere that he's in like an Armageddon church.
Right.
And it's, you know, I always think back to like when the first movie we really reviewed together with Chris on this channel was like 1BR. Yes. And that movie was set in LA. And one of the things that we said about that movie was the scariest part of that movie was that you can conceivably believe that it actually happened. That like there's an entire apartment complex that is part of this like cult where you move in and they basically torture you to ingratiate you into the cult.
Yes.
And there's just something about LA and there's something about like people who are just appear to be normal but are in a cult that seems, you know, like earlier this year, it feels like it was 10 years ago, but earlier in 2022, my whole family went out to Hollywood during our like February break from school. And I spent a week in Hollywood, like literally right a few blocks away from Hollywood Boulevard, by Mann's Chinese Theater, and it's amazing. But I really like. There's a lot of scenes in this movie that where they're walking around in Laurel Canyon, and I would go hiking in Runyon Canyon, which was right next to it, and you're like, you look down at like one of the largest cities in America,
Right.
and all the opulence and excess that is there, but you're
Right.
in like the mountains, and it's like, so it's like there's beauty and there's filth, and it's all so close together, and there really is something weird about LA that I kind of loved when I was there, but I also feel like if I never go back, I'm kind of okay with it too.
Yeah. Well, the movie itself. Oh, good.
No, I thought this movie really captured that with the way the two characters, the way they drop these random things about like, oh yeah, I'm in an Armageddon cult, and oh yeah, I'm following the Pythagoreans, and it's like there's all this weird and like the whole thing about like chasing the symbolism throughout the city, and trying to find out about the early city planners. I'm like, yeah, I could totally see that, some weird occult shit was going on when they built Los Angeles. Sure, I'm in on that.
Right. Well, this movie directly comments on how strange, LA is, right? Because do you remember we watched that documentary Cursed Films, that show? And there was this one episode, I think it was on, maybe it was, no, it wasn't Rosemary's Baby. It was the one that had like the actress in it, and then like her friend had been murdered. Maybe it was Rosemary's
No,
Baby.
it was Rosemary's Baby, because
Yeah.
Roman Polanski's wife was Sharon Tate, and I think it had to do with the Manson family.
Right. Okay, right. And so you think about that particular episode where they do go pretty heavy on the Manson family stuff. Like it's almost like a little bit on Rosemary's Baby and a lot on like the Manson family stuff and that whole area. And there's that one guy who's doing like a Map to the Stars tour, but his tour is just basically all the weird kind of gruesome stuff that's happened in this one area that's around where the Tate house was. And they kind of almost have a sequence like that in this movie, where they talk about how Houdini lived near here and he died. And then Aldous Huxley, who did like the Doors of Perception and stuff, he
Brave New World,
Brave New World, right. He had this crazy trip, that changed his whole life, his whole perspective right around here. And like you mentioned, they talk about the city planning. I do believe that with like this symbol that they kind of had, that symbol that was on John's book when he was a kid,
the triangles,
or he claims that when it was on his book when he was a kid. I feel like that symbol they maybe like digitally put on things in LA, but I wouldn't be surprised if they literally saw this symbol in places and just made a movie around it. See, like I personally, and I said this before, I kind of grasped for, well, what is the ultimate thing you're trying to say? Are you trying to say that these are two men? If you look at the description on Amazon, it says that they're two men that encounter this supernatural experience and they try to sort of capitalize on it with their like burnt out lives. Like it kind of alludes to the fact that they're like older and they don't have much going on in their lives and they're trying to like make something of it. So is that the point of this? They're trying to like sort of make a big deal out of something because they're sort of past their prime, past their heyday. Are they trying to say that when you start to look into conspiracy theories, you kind of spiral and everything becomes a conspiracy theory? Are they trying to say that like people hide things from each other and how we view people affects how we view the world around us? There's so many different things that we could say about this movie, and it never hits you over the head of like, this is our message ever.
I think one of the things that I like about them as filmmakers is what you just said can kind of summarize the majority of their films.
Okay.
That they're never going to tie up every loose end. They're never going to come straight out and say, this is what you've been watching for the last 90 to 120 minutes. But they're going to leave it in an open-ended way that is going to create conversation. and not in the way that, like, you know, because you can have a movie that leaves it open-ended and it's just kind of like a dick about it and like doesn't tell you a key piece of information that you need.
Right.
This movie, there is no real information that you need. You witness what they witness. This weird event in their hotel room, their apartment, not a hotel room, their apartment, where, you know, this like rock, this quartz shell looking rock just raises up and starts to emit colored light. Lights start to shine in their the closet door that doesn't shut.
Right.
And I think like as you were saying, like, what is this movie about? My answer to each one you said was yes. Like, yes, it's two guys who are trying to like save whatever is left of their, in their minds, like a failed existence by capitalizing on this supernatural event that they've witnessed. It's also about guys who, especially Aaron Moorhead's character, John, who falls deep into a rabbit hole of conspiracies and, you know, all sorts of like Reddit holes about what this situation can be.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, so there's that aspect of it too. And I think that that's what makes this such an interesting movie. And I think that's why I would recommend it to people, because I don't feel like, having watched it and having rewatched parts of it, I don't feel like I walked out of this movie going, I don't understand it. That was just too confusing.
Yeah.
I feel like it's the type of movie that, like, if we were in person and not, you know, 2,000 miles away from each other talking on a video screen, we could sit at the bar for 2 hours, like over some beer, talking about this movie. And then we would probably go back and watch it and be like, oh, okay. And that's how I think a lot of their movies are. I've rewatched The Endless. I walked out of the movie theater in The Endless going, wow, that was really good. I'm not really sure what I watched, but that was really good. And then I rewatched it when it went to Shudder, and I was like, okay. Still not really sure what I watched, but I still really liked it. And like Synchronic was very similar. And even Spring, you know, we there have been a lot of movies this year, Barbarian, Fresh, that have started as kind of like, that feel like they're like, oh, this is like a romantic comedy. How cute. And then, oh no, it is something totally different.
Right.
And Spring, which came out like, I think 2014.
At least. Yeah.
That movie did a lot of those same things where it's like, you know, oh, I'm just going to go on a European vacation to get away from my terrible life. And, oh, here's a hot girl. Oh, I'm going to try to hook up with her. And, oh, she's some type of Lovecraftian monster. Okay.
Right. And it has to do with like DNA, and it's much more complicated. She's trying to figure out the science behind it.
I do feel like their movies, and maybe it's just the, like, because they're so science fiction based, that I always feel there is this Lovecraftian feeling to them. And that's really what Lovecraft is. It's like a feeling of the unknowing, the unknown, and trying to make sense of things that don't make sense.
Yeah.
And like the image that's on the Endless poster that shows up when Aaron Moorhead is going around the city looking for the symbols, he passes a movie theater called the Arcadian, and the symbol that looks like this kind of like Lovecraftian skull is there. And then he sees it again. And then that skull that they find at the bottom of the that Levi finds in the water, that also reminds me of that image as well. I don't know. It's just, I also just genuinely like the two guys. And I think that, like, there's a lot of scenes in this movie where it's essentially just two guys talking in an apartment.
Yes.
And I've always been a fan of movies like that if the conversation is interesting. And I think that they know each other obviously so well at this point that they could, I'd actually really be interested to know how much of their dialogue was actually written, or
Right.
how much did like Justin Benson just go, all right, so in this scene, you're gonna bring up Pythagoras, and you're gonna like go for a few minutes about like ancient math.
Right.
And Aaron Moorhead was like, yeah, okay, let's go.
Right.
And
Right.
like,
Right. Yeah, that's a really great point. One of the things I did watch it with my mom is that she said that she really liked the chemistry the two men had with each other, and I was like, well, that's because they are the filmmakers. They made this movie and many others. They are like friends for years, right? Um, you mentioned if you and I were at a bar, we would talk about this movie. And it's kind of interesting because I was thinking about you and I when I was watching this movie. Because we talk about things and we just reference things all the time when we're doing these videos. And the thing is, we are similar to these men in the sense that they are in their 30s, maybe 40s when they meet in this movie. And I think that in itself is another thing they're trying to comment on in this movie, because you don't really make friendships like the two guys have in your 30s and 40s usually. Usually the kind of friendship that they have, you make in like high school, you make in like maybe your early 20s. You just kind of don't hang out with another. Go ahead.
That's a really good point, because like I feel like I might have made it sound, if you've not seen this movie and you're watching us talk about it, you might have gotten the idea that these two are like longtime friends or roommates. And really the movie starts and Levi, Justin Benson's character, has just like moved into this barren apartment in LA, and he looks outside and there's John sitting down there alone smoking a cigarette, and he goes down and he just asks him for a cigarette, and he says he lives in the apartment. John says, I just got out of a relationship. I have some like leftover furniture. If you want like a couch, I could bring up a couch for you. And while like the first time they're ever sharing the same space, they witness this first phenomenon that happens.
Right.
But yeah, I did think about that also. The idea of like these two like random strangers who almost get forced to now like, and it's that weirdness of like they're spending so much time with each other, but they don't know each other. So like that's what leads John to Google Levi and like find out some like weird shit about his past. And Levi ends up like over the course of the movie revealing things to both of them, like revealing things to each other.
Right.
That's a really interesting point. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the movie itself is extremely realistic, because that's what happens in real life. Like, even when you do meet people as an adult and maybe you befriend them, maybe they're your coworkers or something, you strike up conversations, you click, there's something that connects between the two of you, but then you don't know these details. And through social media and stuff, you start to find out other things. You're like, whoa, wait a minute. I like this guy, but this looks a little shady over here. And that's what's great about this movie is there's this sort of exuberance and fun that they have, because I don't know about you, but I actually kind of love weird conspiracy stuff. I don't believe most of it, but when people start saying like, oh, well, there is, there's so much fucking weird shit that they reference in this movie. It's hard to even like pinpoint a specific one. But like, I love when people bring up these random things. Did you know that this happened here and this happened here?
Oh, I have a buddy at work who he will, if you spend 8 minutes with him, he will convince you that we did not land on the moon in 1969.
Oh, okay.
And he has such a well thought out argument with evidence to support it that I'm like, shit, maybe we didn't land on the moon. And like and yeah, like every time like he'll walk into the office, we'll be like, hey man, so the moon landing, right? He's like, nah, bullshit.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought up that reference, because it was making me think about like some of the things that they do say in the movie. Like they mentioned how like John says that it's possible that aliens seeded Earth with life, and it's never like I always thought this. It's like I heard this on a podcast or I saw this on Reddit, like you said. And so he talks about like there being 10 dimensions and that they sort of overlap over each other. And then there's the idea of like, that life is over, like it would take 10,000 years with our most advanced space travel to get to wherever there's life, and all these different things they reference. It's stuff that gets me excited when I hear about it because it's just that sort of outside of the mundane, bland world of thinking. It's like, oh yeah, tell me some more of this weird shit. But it always kind of comes with this price, because usually a lot of times the people that you meet that are into this kind of stuff are kind of unhinged or a little weird, And so throughout the whole movie, when you watch it the first time, there's this sense of paranoia of like, is this going to lead to like a murder at some point? They obviously have issues with each other. There is like great little subtle stuff that you don't maybe even pick up the first time around, where like they're talking about the title for their documentary. And John says, how about something in the light? And then Levi says, what about the door that never shuts? And John says something like, well, that's not going to work because there's too many syllables. And then it's like I said before, you see Benson's facial reaction, and you can tell that it actually kind of hurt him a lot that he dismissed his title. And then he's like, oh, they're very similar. And then he's like, no, there's one more syllable. It messes it all up. Little subtle things like that help build this feeling of tension throughout the whole movie. And you're like, where's this going? And one aspect that you and I haven't even discussed yet that much is that there are other people in the movie, but they're talking heads in this documentary. And the documentary itself has like gotten out of hand. They've had like 6 editors at this point, and their footage gets destroyed at one point. And they try to bring in someone to use special effects to kind of recreate what they saw.
Yeah.
So
like they burn, they accidentally burn all their hard drives, and then they're trying to do reenactments of the stuff that they actually saw, which I thought was interesting in the sense that it made me feel like it felt like both of them are unreliable narrators. Right. And the idea that, all of our info, like, yes, we as the viewer of the movie, we've gotten to see this thing float and emit light and weird stuff happen. But, who's to say these guys aren't just tripping and, trying to film everything, and then their reenactments. Like there's one part where one of the talking heads is like, why did you cast yourselves in the reenactments?
Right. That when that happened the first time I saw it, I was like, wait, what? Like that kind of like really hit me, that part. Yeah, and there's all these little funny details. There's this one guy that they bring in because he sort of inspected their apartment area, and he's the one that found these like crystals and stuff in their apartment.
Yeah, quartz deposits and things like that.
Right, quartz deposits, yeah. And he kind of dismisses some of the things that they say. At one point, like in their documentary, it has this woman who they keep referring to, and it says like chemistry major or something like that. But then we find out that like her degree
PhD was in music.
Music, right. So it's that unreliable narrative that you said, and it's really great. It just really lends itself to that idea of that you don't really know what's going on and what's real or what's not, let's see. I'm just trying to think if there's any other part I wanted to kind of bring up. The end itself of the movie, they kind of hint towards it. I didn't realize it the first time around. So here's spoilers for the movie if you guys haven't seen it. Definitely watch it. It's on Amazon right now. I didn't really pick up on this the first time around, but there's multiple cuts where they show you almost get this feeling of falling from up high, right? You're falling from high and you're going towards the ground. And when I started seeing it the second time around, I was like, oh, that's almost like flashing forward because Levi does fall to his death by the end of the movie. But then I realized that's the perspective of his sister, who his sister died too. They allude to his sister in the movie, and the idea that he got her addicted to drugs and that they were at a construction site and she fell to her death at one point, right? And so there's like real deep sadness to Levi's character, and there's like real sort of kind of dark ambition to John's character, you know, and it affects your viewing of this movie because you kind of think of Levi as this sort of slacker who's not that bright, right? But then you're like, oh, there's more to him. And then with John, you think of, oh, he's this nice kind of reliable guy to Levi's sort of foil, but then it's like inverted by the movie, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I recommend it. I actually kind of want to go check out The Endless, and I want to go check out Synchronic after this.
I'm just a fan of these two guys. Like, and I've noticed, you know, getting back to just the idea of LA, you know, I rewatched Pulp Fiction the other day, and Pulp Fiction's easily one of my top 2 favorite movies ever made. It's that and Jaws.
Okay.
And, you know, that's a movie entirely set in LA with all these like crazy eclectic characters who are just having these long, interesting conversations. And it almost reminded me of the scene where at the end where Jules and Vincent are, you know, Jules feels that they've encountered a miracle because the guy shot at them and somehow missed. And they spend the next almost like 15 minutes going back and forth about like, what is a miracle? You know, what does it mean if you experience a miracle? And you know, and that movie also has like, you know, these seedy dark alleys with these crazy characters and sex dungeons and gimps. And you're like, what the fuck is going on? But you're like, yeah, that's LA. Okay. I could see that happening.
Yeah.
And I kind of got that vibe again, watching this movie of these two weird characters hanging out, talking about wild things. And like, I just finished teaching my freshman classes about, you know, ancient Greece, and we brought up Pythagorean theorem. And now I'm like, shit, is there a Pythagorean death cult running around LA trying to save the world or kill the world with triangles? I'm like, and I feel like this is what I feel like after I watch a Benson and Moorhead project. Like, I have all these wild thoughts going through my head. And it makes me, we've talked about this on our other channel, your other channel, Comic Books Transformed. We reviewed Raised by Wolves, which was an amazing HBO Max show that they canceled after one season. Yep. And then we just finished reviewing The Peripheral on Amazon Prime, the first season. Both of those shows are not horror at all. They are 100% science fiction.
Yes.
And this is our horror channel, but this movie is, I would say, about 90%, 95% science fiction.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And there are some horror movies that you walk out of and you are like deep in thought about.
Yeah.
But no genre of movie makes me, or no genre of TV makes me start to like think about things the way science fiction does. And I think that's why science fiction is such a great genre and why people flock to it in droves. You know, a lot of people won't even admit that, but then like when you look at, you know, some of the largest IPs in the world, like Star Wars, Star Trek, Battlestar Galactica, Doctor Who, it's all based in just the incredible weirdness of sci-fi.
Yeah.
And these two guys, like I said, like for all the talk about Ari Aster, Jordan Peele, Mike Flanagan as like these, you know, modern horror voices.
Yeah.
These guys have been going on almost a decade now, and they have a litany, almost 5 to 6 films that are just rich in lore. The Resolution and The Endless deal with like time travel and multiple universes.
Yeah.
Synchronic dealt with jumping through time as well. So if you like mind trippy science fiction, you're gonna get it with these two guys.
Yeah. And you know, Moorhead and Benson, if you guys are watching this, I kind of did reach out to you on Twitter through Messenger at one point. But if you guys want to be on our show, we'd love to talk to you. I mean, obviously, Danny's a fan. I would watch your other movies and talk to you about your other movies too. But if you want to come on, reach out to us as well. you mentioned, Danny, that there's all these major like box office successes, these major franchises, and most of them are sci-fi. It's interesting because you said there's that sort of that thought-provoking, makes you think kind of aspect to it. I think that it also has to do with wonder. And what's interesting about this movie is that when you first see these characters, before anything supernatural happens, they're very like cynical, and they're kind of like making fun of LA and what it's like to live in LA. You know, they start talking about this goth party that Levi is the bartender at, and that John was the photographer at, right? And they're making all these jokes about life and life in LA. Then this event happens, and all of a sudden it's like a fire is lit up inside of them, and they're talking about all these different theories and the fabric of the universe, you know? And like that's what movies do, or really good movies, and these movies that you're referencing, is that they kind of set that sense of wonder where you're in your banal life and you're kind of bored and you're like, okay, this is going to happen next. But then something kind of miraculous happens and you get excited about it. And the movies that we referenced, like you referenced Pulp Fiction, you referenced Nope, we referenced a documentary that was about Rosemary's Baby, but a lot of it was in LA. You know, Rosemary's Baby is obviously New York, right? But this is LA for the documentary. What's amazing about this movie is that LA is a character in this movie, and yet the majority of the movie is in this guy's apartment. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that really tells you something about filmmaking and like when it's in capable hands and the hands of good writers, like how they could make a city be a character, even though the majority of it is just one apartment in the city. So I think yeah, I really enjoyed this movie. I'm starting to like it more and more during this discussion. And I want to just check out their other films at this point now, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's a good stopping point for our discussion. Boy, we have a lot of shit coming up on the Lastercast, don't we? We are going to talk about Christmas, Bloody Christmas this week, right? And
Yes.
what
That's
was
the new Joe Bagos Robot Santa movie, which is on Shudder
Yes.
now.
What was the thing? Oh, should we tell people what we're going to do tomorrow or no?
Oh, so the biggest news, the biggest news in the horror community, aside from the disappointing Shudder news, was that Mike Flanagan's production company, Mike Flanagan and Trevor Macy, they are moving from Netflix to Amazon Prime in 2023 or 4. Because I know that his Fall, The House of Usher is still coming out on Netflix next year. But that's going to be the last Mike Flanagan Netflix project. And then they are moving to Amazon Prime. And almost immediately they broke word that they are going to be working on what a lot of horror fans have been dreaming about for decades at this point, The Dark Tower. Stephen King's The Dark Tower. And so immediately Athena and I started like fan casting the Dark Tower series, and you've read it. I told you, Athena was like super excited. She, hasn't been on the channel for a while, but whenever we did our Stephen King month, she was like a very prominent face on it. And we want to kind of do like a fan casting, you, me, and Athena talk about who we would put in the major roles of Stephen King's The Dark Tower.
Yes. Should be awesome. I actually have a Dark Tower shirt, so I can actually wear a shirt that's appropriate to our video for once. That'd be nice.
I think I looked through somewhere.
Yeah. No, but I'm super excited about that. I'm gonna try to pick who I truly think that Mike Flanagan would cast. I'm gonna really work.
Well, that's I was kind of like, here's who I would cast, and then I'm like, well, let me also look at who Mike Flanagan uses in every movie.
Exactly.
And I'm like,
exactly.
But
yeah, but I'm not coming from that.
Oh yeah, Athena hasn't really watched any of Flanagan's Netflix stuff, so she's like, I'm just going off who I think should be in it.
Sure. Yeah.
I also have a review, which actually at the time of our recording should be live on our channel now. I got a screener a few weeks ago, and then because of the New York City Horror Film Festival, it kind of got pushed aside. Brand new horror movie that just came out called The Harbinger, which is available now on VOD. In a year of amazing genre movies, this is another one. It's a very low budget, very much like this, made in COVID, made it during the COVID time, about two college friends who reunite, and one of them is basically being haunted in her dreams by this demon called the Harbinger that is dressed like a plague doctor.
Oh,
So
okay.
it draws some inspiration from A Nightmare on Elm Street, some inspiration from, I think, the work of like James Wan, but it's also a pretty interesting and original take on like the whole concept of like dream monsters and things like that. And I really enjoyed it. It's short. It's like 85 minutes. It's available on VOD. I really recommend it. And my full review is up on the channel now if you want to check that out. It was directed by Andy Mitten, who directed The Witch in the Window. Did you ever see that?
I
That was
did
like
not. No.
yeah, that was like a really cool little 80-minute movie that was on Shudder for a while.
Okay.
Yeah, cool little like haunted house flick. So he's got
That's
some
awesome.
good cred.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. Last thing, if you guys are still watching us and stuff, I also interview horror writers for our channel. That's like a small portion, like maybe like 15% of our channel too. And for that, I interviewed a whole bunch of people. I still need to edit their videos. We have Paul Gandersman and Peter Hall. I interviewed them. That's going to be edited. Stephen Kozanowski. I'm working on editing that. These two videos will probably come out this week. Then on Tuesday, I have 3 different interviews going. That night, I'm interviewing Clay McLeod Chapman. His book Ghost Eaters is like on a lot of people's top 10 lists this year. I'm interviewing Cody Goodfellow, who did the book Perfect Union, and that's put out by Ghoulish Books. And speaking of Ghoulish Books, Max Booth III, who was our very first author interview we ever did on this channel, is coming back to talk about his books like Abnormal Statistics and Maggots Screaming. And I'm reading Maggots Screaming right now. Fantastic fucking book. I recommend all of these books I just mentioned.
Yeah,
But anyway,
we also reviewed Clay McLeod Chapman's podcast that he wrote, Quiet Part Loud, which was produced by Jordan Peele, who directed Nope, who we compared Something in the Dirt to. And there we have come full circle, and we will see you next time.
Yes. Thank you, Pythagoras, for tying that all together. We'll see you all next time.